So who do you have at number two? Well, I think I have I have a clear guess. It's either the Mavericks or the Pelicans, but which one of
Yes,
them?
Pelicans.
Oh, interesting. Okay, wow. Okay.
Well, so no. I mean, look, we might as well get into like the one number two and number one and number two here because I knew you would have this reaction, and I kind of want to talk about Dallas first.
Okay.
As
Yeah.
the reason to why I have New Orleans a second. I believe in Luka that much.
That's fair.
That's where I am. I realize that sounds ridiculous, but because I don't necessarily love the roster around him.
Right.
I mean, look, Dorian Finney-Smith, great value. At some point, he's going to be looking at a much larger deal. Josh Richardson is probably gone after this year. Kristaps is like, I don't know if he's like the main guy for Luka in the long run. Tim Hardaway Jr. is up. Maxi Kleber, as much as I love him, is still a bit player. Now, Jalen Brunson to me is like a mainstay, but
Yeah.
that's about it. Outside of that, there's not a whole lot on that roster that I like at all.
Right. Yeah. I mean, full disclosure, I didn't have the Mavericks in my top five.
I think that's weird. Like
Well,
when you have Luka though,
I
like
know.
Luka might legitimately end up as a top 10 player of all time when everything is said and done.
Yeah, it's
Exactly.
just it is. I love. I picked Luca as my preseason MVP. It is the
Yeah.
rest of the roster. I mean, they traded picks in 21 and 23,
It's brutal. Yeah.
and yeah, I mean, apparently Mavericks Twitter is at the point where they are afraid Josh Richardson is going to opt in. He's got an $11.6 million player option, and they're actively rooting for him to opt out.
Yeah.
Like, there's
get
nothing
that.
here. I mean,
I get that.
Kristaps, if he stays healthy, great. But otherwise, Brunson, I agree, has been really good this year. But he's only got one more year until he's a free agent as well. Mm-hmm. This is a bleak supporting cast around Luka long term.
But Brian, that might be an asset.
That's fair.
And you know why though? Why would that be an asset if you have a very bleak supporting staff?
Well, you're gonna free up cap space at some point. And
Bingo.
and
The exact thing we just talked about with the Hornets.
Yeah.
You would have cap space. And let me ask you this. Who the hell wouldn't want to come play with Luka?
yeah, in a state with no state taxes.
That
There's-
is all state income tax, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Bonus there, but
Yep.
yeah, I mean, next year they're not going to be in a spot where they have a ton of money, most likely. But the year after,
Right.
Luca's extension will kick in, and then KP will still be on the books as well. They'll have Dwight Powell. They have Kleba at 9.1 million non-guarantee, but that's when you can really start to have some money to play around with.
Yes. So here's the thing. This all boils down to Porzingis, I think.
Yeah. Yes.
There's no way to really optimize cap space for this year, as you alluded to, with him on the roster. And even if you did, there's not a whole lot there. It's the 2022 market. What do you want to do from there? Because Luka, like you said, is going to be in the first year of his presumed max extension. Well, if you put that on the table alongside Kristaps, they occupy, what, like 67 million?
Yeah. I would have to give me a second.
Somewhere
and
along
I could-
those lines,
yeah, I
right?
could do the math in a minute.
Yeah.
Well,
so-
we don't even know what the cap's going to be at that point. Actually, I
No, but
I
like a
can't do-
guesstimate between 65 and 70 million, right?
Yeah, I think
And
that's fair.
and so you have to figure out right now this season, is Kristaps going to be a guy who routinely is worth 30 plus million a year for your team? If you say no, he's not. He just isn't healthy enough. He's not producing at a high enough rate. Then this year you're going to go into like 2021, 2022. That's going to be the transition year, I think, where you move off of Kristaps on. This is the thing. What you get back, that is the big question, because he's still young enough to be able to get a haul in. This is not a Kemba Walker situation where I'm going, oh, I just need to get off of him, and if I get Obi Toppin, that's fine. Like, no, I would want something in return for Kristaps, and then I would lean hard into the trade market from there with every bit and piece that they have. So, like, let's say Dwight Powell, who is at 11 million, if he just regains his touch just a little bit next year at the trade deadline, I would optimize draft picks. If Josh Richardson opts in with his 11.6 player option and kind of plays the brand of basketball we thought he would, that's another guy you can send off for draft picks. And the reason I would do that is Luka is young enough. You can play it the other way around. Like when I said about LaMelo with the Hornets, just in terms of he's so young that you need to optimize cap space around him. Well, Luka is still so young when he enters his max that you can still build around him through the draft. He's still that young. So if you just make sure that Luka is your primary, big money earner, you can get draft picks for every single one of these guys.
Hopefully.
And then you can build from there. No, I think you could. Like, if Josh Richardson is playing at, a full-time starting caliber level, you could get picks for him, right? Via a contender?
I don't know. I mean, given how the last 2 years have gone for Richardson, I don't know what his value is right now.
All right.
But because he's like the conceptual 3-and-D guy, but he isn't really a great 3-point shooter. And we've seen now, the more you ask him to create off the dribble, the less you're going to get in return. So I just don't know I don't know if he's supposed to be a starter on a really good team.
All right. I still think, ultimately speaking, if he has a bounce back year, because while I agree with you that he's not the shooter that we thought he was, I don't think this year represents his true value as a shooter.
That's fair. I guess I'm hung up on comparing him to Tim Hardaway Jr., where he had those seasons with the Knicks, and it was like, okay, he's like a starter on a bad team, is not really going to be productive on a good team. Then he comes to Dallas, and all of a sudden he's shooting 40% from three because he's getting fed by Luka. It's like, oh, okay. He could fit in as this, especially now we're seeing as this nice super sub role. Richardson's also playing next to Luka, and he's just not had that same bump.
He hasn't, and that is absolutely fair. That said, I still think for him it's an adjustment period. So some players are just more naturally inclined to play off of others, whereas Josh may not be, and maybe he just needs to have just another year under him. Mm-hmm. But you bring up a good point about Tim Hardaway Jr., and this is one of the things that I was also thinking about. So we agree that Tim Hardaway has definitely, even though he's played off of Luka, his shot selection has grown better. He has become a better player.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
The fact that he also dropped 42, and that was in a non-Luka game, right? I don't think Luka played.
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah. That to me proves, let me just double check. He didn't. That to me proves that there's something there. So what if a team out there is going, well, Tim Hardaway Jr. would be really good for us if we're like maybe in on the bubble contender. Mm-hmm. And let's say you have a bad contract on your books. We also have a couple draft picks. So you do a sign and trade. You're saying, if you're the Mavs, okay, screw it. We'll just optimize draft picks for the next year or two. Let's get in a back contract for Tim Hardaway Jr. in a sign and trade. Because of course you would have to go that route, because if the team wants Hardaway on their team and they don't have cap space, you would have to go that route anyway. So why not? You say, let's give you that guy, and then we'll take some of your crap back, and all it's going to cost you is a first-round draft pick. Because that ultimately has to be their direction here. It has to be reacquiring some of the lost draft picks that they've spent over the past few years. They need draft capital. Because right now, you're looking at a situation where they have Kristaps and Luka, who is going to be extended, at which point that's going to clog up your cap sheet. So figure out ways to get draft picks. And then if push comes to shove that you get maybe a haul, I'm not saying they're going to end up as the Oklahoma City Thunder here, but if they can get just a small treasure trove of draft picks, they would still have Dwight Powell. They would still be able to not, guarantee Maxi Kleber's contract. And then suddenly, there are contracts that you can move around and get something good. And then using the draft picks as payment for whoever they identify. My point here being is they have a lot of avenues to go through. I don't think it's just the free agency game that they can go to. They can go the draft route. They can go the the sign and trade route. There are a lot of possibilities here. The one primary factor, and this is what I think drives everything, is players' willingness to play with Luka.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think my hesitation, it's the supporting cast, and I don't think that they can get a ton of value for anyone. Right. Even if you do a sign and trade for Tim Hardaway, like, you're not getting a top 10 pick for him.
Oh, like, no. No, of course not.
Yeah.
That would be maybe a top 20 pick. Or
right, that like converts into a second or 2 seconds or whatever. So
if it doesn't convert.
So you still have to, and the Mavericks with Luka, and if Kristaps is healthy, I don't expect them, they're going to be in the playoffs every year. They should be, or at least in the contention for the playoffs. I don't expect them to ever have a year, unless Luka gets hurt, where they completely go off the rails and get a top 5 pick to add to this core. So it's similar to the Boston thing, where it's I really like the top talent, but you really have to nail these next few moves and nail those draft picks that are going to be in the mid to late first round.
Right.
Because you just aren't going to have a ton of flexibility, at least as long as Kristaps is on the books.
And that's why I'm proposing getting draft picks elsewhere, because you're absolutely right. The baseline is high just with Luka. Just forget about Porzingis. Only Luka, if we take that approach. That's almost as he ages, I think they're going to be an automatic playoff team just by having him on that team. So that's why you would have to get draft picks from elsewhere.
Yeah.
Your own draft picks are not going to be worth a whole lot, but then what if you make a certain move with Tim Hardaway Jr. and Josh Richardson, whatever, and you end up with 2 or 3 top 20 picks in maybe a deep draft? Because as we know, sometimes we enter a draft going, "Oh, this isn't very deep. This isn't very good," and then there you go. It was
right.
So I wouldn't hate it. It's just a matter of them hitting on those picks. Yeah. Or using them as capital for making a larger trade.
Yeah. So I have the Pelicans at number 1, so we'll get to them shortly because you have them at 2. I have the Thunder at 2 on my list, which I just wanted to circle back to quickly before we wrap up with the Pelicans. So for me, the Thunder, you're right. They are complete, of any team in the league, they are the biggest mystery box because, yes, they have SGA, who is going to be a star. I just really like some of these young guys. As bad as they've been this year, especially with SGA and Horford out, they're not trying to field a competitive roster right now. What they're doing is worse than anything that Sam Hinkie ever did. And I don't understand why they're not catching the same amount of heat for it, but that's a topic for another day. We're seeing flashes from guys like Baisley and, a guy like Dort. You're talking about Boston needs to throw some of their young guys into the fire and see what they can do. OKC's doing that, and we're getting to see a Luguentz Dort who's really he's had to be a primary scorer, which is not the role he's going to play when this Thunder team is good again. But he's showing that he has more scoring upside than I think anyone would have realized coming into this year. He made his name for himself as kind of the James Harden stopper last year in the playoffs. And, he hit a couple threes, I think, in that Game 7. It was oh, my God, Lou Dort is the one raining threes? And now it's he can do that. He's shooting 35% on 6.2 threes a game. So I like the collection. I like the supporting cast that they have. They have some high upside guys in Baisley, Dort, Maledon, Poku, who I just don't even understand. When I watch him play, it is just I can't figure out what he is. He's a guard in a 7-footer's body, basically.
Yeah. No one knows what he is. I've been saying that on my YouTube channel repeatedly. I don't know. You don't know. The Thunder don't even know.
Yeah.
Nobody knows.
But it's great that they're just putting it again, like putting him to the test and seeing what he could become. It's awesome. And they're at the point where SGA is up for an extension this year, but like they aren't at the point where Atlanta or Cleveland is, where they have to make decisions on some of these guys. Like Poku's a rookie, Baisley is in year 2, Ty Jerome's in year 2, Dort's up for signed for 2 more years as well. So they've got time to figure this thing out. They've got Moses Brown on two non-guaranteed years after this and a team option after that. Isaiah Roby as well. Like they just have a ton of these young guys locked up on great contracts where
Agreed.
It's not going to limit their or hinder their financial flexibility anyway. Kenrich Williams also has been very good for them. He signed for 2 more years as well. So, for all of my concerns about supporting cast for some of these other teams, like Dallas and Boston, OKC, it's the exact opposite. Except they have, they don't. I don't think SGA you could put in the same tier as a Tatum or a Luka, obviously, but he isn't super far off.
He isn't.
He's going to be an all-star as soon as next year. And then what I come back to is OKC has 17 picks, 17 first-round picks in the next 7 years. Even if they mess up half of them or more than half of them,
more, yeah.
There's a chance because Houston, I believe, sends the pick to OKC if it's outside the top 4 this year. Houston has the worst record in the league, so they have about a 50-50 chance of keeping that pick. Right. But there's a chance that OKC walks into 2 top 5 picks this year, or 2 top 7 picks. So this is one of those ones where it's like, depending on how the lottery shakes out, like what if they add an Evan Mobley and a Jalen Green to SGA and all these young guys? Like all
Absolutely.
of a sudden, they could just go gangbusters next year. I think Horford's probably shown enough this season and just running out his contract by a year that they're going to flip him for value at some point. I don't think they're going to have to send a pick to get off of him.
No, absolutely not.
So I know that they are far less established than a lot of these other teams that we've discussed today, but given the foundation that they have, it's almost like they are set up too well to fail.
And that, I think, is an entirely fair point. I just want to reiterate, the only reason that I did not have them number 1 was basically the known commodities. I agree with you that the players you brought up are super interesting. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, you also just have to look at the top tier. And that's where I think Shea is like the one, clear number 1 star that you have on that team. And then there's a severe, drop off from him to Dort or Baisley.
Yeah, for
Poku.
Sure. For sure.
But you're absolutely right that in the future, that drop off is going to diminish, presumably. But the fact that we don't know that yet, that's what makes me put them just outside the top 5. Realistically speaking, if we were to do this fully saying, well, you know what, screw known commodities, they would be number 1 for both of us. And it wouldn't even be close. Because, like you said, 17 draft picks. It's insane. They would. Let's look at the process. The Sixers got 2 picks right in terms of Joel and Ben when it came to stars.
Yeah.
The Thunder could hit on 2 of them and then bust on the remaining 15.
Right.
And they would just add 2 top-tier guys to Shea, Lou Dort, Darius Baisley, and whatever Poku becomes, and that would be tremendous.
Yeah.
The odds are, no pun intended, in their favor.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But I just cannot sit here and look at Zion and Luka, for example, and go, well, I take a question mark over those guys.
Yeah. So
I'm just not there.
And that's why I had the Pelicans number 1 on my list. So let's wrap up.
Totally get that.
Let's wrap up with them because, yes, it starts with Zion clearly. Like what the development that he's shown this year as point Zion in particular and what he's doing
Right.
around the rim, like his historic rate of scoring around the rim, it's clear that this guy is just he's living up to the hype that he came
Yes.
into the league with. I think the thing that, already I think you would put Zion on a higher tier than SGA, but one of the things that separated the Pelicans from the Thunder in my mind was the Pelicans also have a Brandon Ingram who is, not on the caliber of Zion, but still an all-star level player, and they have him locked up for, 4 more years after this. Still super young. You can confidently build around Ingram and Zion for now, and if you decide at some point that Ingram isn't the right number 2 piece next to Zion, I don't think you have any trouble trading a Brandon Ingram for a ton of value elsewhere.
Right. So this is the thing for me, right? I think Zion and Luka are super close in terms of value. Mm-hmm. I have Luka over Zion at this point, but I think they're super close. Mm-hmm. What concerns me about Zion is the playing style and the injury risk still.
Fair.
I mean, that's just not going to go away. And I hope to be wrong every single day for the next 15 years. And by year 15, he has a great, career that isn't hampered by injury by any stretch whatsoever. It would be fantastic. But this is still a 6'7" dude who carries a 280-pound frame. Mm-hmm. That concerns me, and that just draws out that process for me. And that's why I have them as number 2 as well. Good Lord, what if that goes wrong?
Yeah.
What if that weight suddenly creates some knee issues and just derails his entire career? Knock on wood that doesn't happen, of course. But if it does, oh boy, I mean, where do you go from there? I mean, sure, you pivot to Ingram, but he's not a number 1 guy, I don't think. I think he's pretty good set up in this role, as a number 2 guy. But, where do you go from there, right?
Yeah. Oh, no, it's entirely contingent on Zion staying healthy. This thing goes belly up. But I will say, they have some other interesting young pieces in Alexander Walker, Kyra Lewis Jr., Jackson Hayes, Lonzo Ball. We'll see what happens this summer, whether they decide to re-sign him.
Najee Marshall?
Yeah, who's been very good.
Yeah.
I think the 2 things that give me, other than Zion's health, the 2 things that worry me to some extent, we talked about Eric Bledsoe last episode, but how they figure out how to get out of him because he is just such a bad fit with the rest of that team. And then also, Steven Adams has been good for them this year, and he's only signed for 2 more years. It's not like a cap-crippling contract by any means, but is he the right piece next to Zion, or do you want a more modern-day stretch 5? How do you figure out, or does Jackson Hayes just develop into that player and you don't have to worry about it? I don't know, but figuring out kind of the pieces to put around Zion and Ingram. But to their credit, they also, it's not like OKC. I was looking for the exact number of draft picks that they have coming up, but I couldn't find it quickly. But, they also have a ton of additional draft capital coming their way. The first from the Lakers this year, 3 seconds coming this year as well. 2 seconds next year. A swap from the Lakers, a first from the Lakers in 2024, first from Milwaukee in 25 and 27, plus a swap in 26. So they don't owe any of their own picks. So they've got basically 2 first-round picks in most of the upcoming drafts. They, like OKC, are just going to have a ton of opportunities to add more talent to this roster.
I think that's why they end up letting Lonzo Ball walk.
Interesting.
Yeah, and see, here's the thing. I think they want to retain him, but I also think they realize that it seemed like New York, which has been putting connection to Lonzo Ball. Mm-hmm. They have so much money to offer, and they probably don't mind playing a little bit more than market value right now because they anticipate certain improvements from Lonzo because he's so young. And that's where they might go, yeah, you know what? we can take this dip of losing Lonzo because we can always pivot because of the amount of draft picks we have. We have Kyra Lewis, we have gilgeous-alexander, all those guys you just mentioned. And theoretically, what if you package those guys like Nikhil and Kyra and Jackson Hayes and some of the draft picks? You could get something really good from that. I don't think they're super scared to lose Lonzo.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think they would be devastated if they lose him. He's another one like John Collins, where I think, assuming the offer isn't assuming no team gives him an outrageous contract, I don't know. I could see them wanting to keep him just to trade him later.
Yeah, that's another point. I think maybe that's also one of the subplots that we're going to be seeing this year, just because of the weak market. Mm-hmm. That teams are just going to go, oh, you know what? Let's retain certain guys even though we don't want them, and then we can flip them later. The concern there being, of course, that restricted free agents like Lonzo, like John Collins, and hell, even Lauri Markkanen in Chicago are like, nope, that's not good enough for us. We don't want to do that.
Right.